Hello fellow rail fans. In this video I'm going to discuss some Western New York railroad history. Hello everyone. Welcome back to Rail Fan 76. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar. I am the content creator for this channel and I am also a rail fan. If you are new to the channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're one of my returning subs, please like and share. Okay, well, it's been a while since my last upload. I'm still getting my traction here and figuring out the rhythm for this channel. I actually intended to, I intended for the next video to be another trip summary along the Northeast Corridor. I'll just cut that off there. But I ran into some technical difficulties in creating that video, so I had to think of something else. And as I was cleaning up my place here in Northern Virginia, I found this. This book is entitled A History of Railroads in Western New York, the second edition by Edward T. Dunn. All right, so Edward T. Dunn was a faculty member at Canisius College in Buffalo. And I purchased this book, I believe, back in the 1990s from the Niagara Hobby Shop in Cheektowaga, New York, which is a suburb of Buffalo. I'm from Buffalo. And it's interesting because sometimes you buy things and you set them down for years and they sit off in boxes for years and years and years, and you don't know why you bought them. Maybe you intended to use them, or in this case read this book when I first got it, and then you find it years later and you have a season to read it and you have a use for it. So I, having started Railfan 76 here, I decided to read this book. I've never read it, and I actually started reading it, and I only got but so far because I think I was in graduate school. And so I started over. So now I made it my mission to read this book along with several others. But it tells the history of railroads in Western New York. So I grew up in Buffalo, and throughout my childhood, as I would move, me and my family would move around the city, whether it was driving for groceries or going to church or going to basketball games or any other events, as I would look around, I would see abandoned railroad tracks all around Buffalo and Western New York. I would see bridges, railroad bridges that were no longer in use in and around the city. And I would look as a child and I wonder what kind of trains used to ride on those bridges. I wonder what kind of trains used to ride on these rails at various parts of the city and in various parts of the city. And why were these rails abandoned? Why are these bridges no longer used? Why have these routes been torn up and now many of those bridges and rails are no longer there? But my point is, as I came of age, it was an era after all of these routes and rails and bridges were in use in Western New York. I grew up traveling on Amtrak's, or should I say, the Empire Corridor of Amtrak, because Amtrak is an inanimate, it's a company, so it doesn't have ownership. That's the writer in me coming out. But I rode the Empire Corridor out to see my father in the summer times, and then in some instances I got to ride down to New York City, which those were some of the most fun times of my life. And I wrote an essay on it. I'm going to leave that below in the description box in case there are any readers watching this. But chapter 2 of this book is entitled Before the Central Was. So, in other words, before the New York Central came about, because the New York Central, that main line, gave rise to the Penn Central and the Conrail, and now CSX owns that main line. Amtrak rents the use of that main line now for its Empire Corridor service. But what was before the New York Central? That's what this chapter 2, gets into. So the passage you're about to hear is a passage from chapter 2, Before the Central Was, discussing how what we know as that CSX main line, how that came about, how that came to be. Because it wasn't always there. And in my childhood, and in my lifetime, riding Amtrak from the Exchange Street station out to Albany and Schenectady and then down to New York City, you just kind of took for granted that was always there. You could go to the Exchange Street station, or now you could go online, purchase your tickets, and then you could travel from Buffalo out to Schenectady or even Rochester or Syracuse within a couple of hours. Or you could travel down to New York City within 7 hours, assuming everything was on time. But it wasn't always that way. As a matter of fact, it was a more cumbersome journey and a more laborious journey. So, the passage you're about to hear is from chapter 2, Before the Central Was. So I'm going to wrap, the video is going to end after that passage. So once again, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're new to the channel, please definitely consider subscribing. And I'm going to say, as I always say, air travel and car travel are necessary in our modern society. Riding on boats is fun, but my favorite method and mode of travel will always be on the trains and the railroads. Take care, and I will talk to you the next time. And let me know if you have any thoughts or comments below in the comments section, or if you grew up seeing abandoned rails and bridges wherever you're from. Take care, and I will talk to you the next time. Bye-bye. There were now 7 separate short lines across New York State. 8 if the 20-mile Schenectady and Troy, which opened in 1842, is added, an upshot of Troy's commercial rivalry with Albany. At first, the harassed traveler, passing over 7 different roads, had to change cars and look after his baggage 6 times. Therefore, it was necessary to correlate the service in the interest of through passengers. The 2 companies between Schenectady and Syracuse had begun the process by pooling their equipment and running trains without change of cars in Utica. But there were still too many changes, the worst, beloved of hackney cab drivers, that from one depot to the other at Rochester, which was not closed until March 19, 1844. Meeting in Albany in January 1843, representatives of the 7 roads decided to run 2 trains daily, each way, from spring to fall between Buffalo and the Hudson River, connecting with the morning and night boats at Albany and Troy. At that time, Albany lacked railroad connections with New York City, though it had been connected with Boston via the Albany and West Stockbridge and the Boston and Worcester since 1841. Eastbound trains left Buffalo at 6 a.m. and 4 p.m., and westbound trains left Albany and Troy at 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. A continuous trip was scheduled for 25 hours. Since the fastest packet boats running day and night on the canal took 4 days, the handwriting for them was on the wall, though cheaper if slower boats continued for many years. In reading the following 1843 table of times and distances, certain points should be kept in mind. The gap of several blocks on Rochester's west side, the wooden rails plated with thin iron straps, lengthy stops at the more important stations for handling the train, meals for passengers in station eating houses, and the fact that most through passengers slept overnight at Syracuse. These trains carried no diners or sleeping cars. So these are the routes, trip durations, trip distances, and speeds on those routes. Buffalo to Rochester, 6 hours, 75 miles, 12 and a half miles per hour. Rochester to Auburn, 6 hours, 78 miles, 13 miles per hour. Auburn to Syracuse, 2 hours, 26 miles at 13 miles per hour. Syracuse to Utica, 4 hours, 53 miles at 13 miles per hour. Utica to Albany, 7 hours, 94 miles, 13 and a half miles per hour. Utica to Troy, 7 hours, 100 miles at 14 miles per hour. During the winter, there was to be a train each way daily, one leaving Albany at 9 o'clock a.m. and spending the night at Syracuse, the other leaving Buffalo at the same time and also spending the night at Syracuse. There was also to be an accommodation departing from each terminal at midnight and stopping everywhere, the fare on which was 2.5 cents a mile on better cars and 1.5 cents a mile on emigrant cars, which at this period were broken down coaches. Figure 2.3 is an advertisement for the first through trains between Buffalo and Albany. First class or mail trains charge 3 cents a mile. The picture depicts travel accommodations on what is presumably a first class train which made a limited number of stops. Notice the baggage car and the open carriage on a flat car. Note also the parasols in the rear car. In the 19th century, a tan was not as later looked upon as the mark of a member of the leisure class. Male, non-farm northern laborers earned about $22 a month in 1840 if they worked full-time. It would cost a Buffalo worker over half his monthly salary to ride to Albany first class and 36% for second class. Throughout the 1840s, advertisements for railroads that appeared in the first page of Buffalo newspapers were lost amid announcements of departures of numerous steamboat companies that linked the city with all major ports up the lake. The speed of trains was gradually increased after the closing of the gap at Rochester and the replacing of iron straps by iron rails during the years 1847 to 1849. A convention of superintendents at Syracuse in November 1849 adopted the timetable shown in Figure 2.5 for the winter of 1849 to 1850. The express took 14 hours between Buffalo and Albany, the mail 17 hours and 45 minutes, and the night train 19 hours and 30 minutes. The one through freight daily was scheduled at 27 hours and it ran first and only during the winter when the canal was closed.